What did that kid in your school get expelled for? High school, senior year, he was the stereotypical computer geek slash pocket protector kid. Very smart, generally quiet, was nice but awkward. But somehow he found a way to access the part of the school's storage network where teachers could save their files. He made copies of thousands of quizzes, tests, answer keys, etc. Lots were from his AP US history teacher, but I was told he had stuff from most teachers. He sold copies of answer keys and exams to kids, and eventually someone told the school administrators. They contacted the police, and while he was at school one day, they went to his house with a warrant and confiscated his computers. Arrested him when he came home. Teachers were mad. Every compromised test had to be remade. Hundreds of hours of work for his history teacher, who had to remake all his lesson materials for the year all over again. They threatened him with the possibility of being prosecuted as an adult, that each file was its own crime, and he was looking at thousands of charges. This was ultimately to just get a plea deal, which was something like a lot of community service, expulsion from that school, and probation. I think if he made it through probation, it would all end up sealed or something. Now this is the kid you hired to prevent that kind of stuff eventually, right? Story 2. There was a super senior at my high school. Each super indicates that extra year you stay at high school, so this dude was already in his 6th year of high school. I was a freshman when I met him. I was a junior at this time I'm referencing. So he brings a shuriken during lunch. He demonstrates how he was learning how to throw one. He throws it at a wall and it just bounces off and lands at a different lunch table. Fortunately, no one was harmed. Unfortunately for that dude, the people at the table got very upset and yelled loud enough to get the school security guards' attention. Yes, we had school security guards. The next week, I heard he got expelled. I would see him again as a super senior during my senior year. The worst part is, I don't remember seeing him during graduation. Yikes. I can't imagine why he didn't just drop out after his first super senior year. Story 3. So this guy didn't exactly get expelled, but I'm thinking this was close enough. I went to a very small regional high school in the middle of the woods, Connecticut, with a class size of about 100 on average, so we had all the farmers and weirdos and do-nothings you could think of. Our class didn't have too much school spirit, so we didn't do an organized senior prank. Some of the agriculture kids decided to take it upon themselves to put one together regardless, and granted, these guys can be pretty stupid and reckless. Anyway, a couple of weeks before grad, my buddy walks into the bathroom first thing in the morning. He creaks open the stall door looking forward to a morning number 2, only to find a 3-foot-long snapping turtle staring back up at him. He takes a deep breath and starts to spread the news. People were surprised, but honestly not too surprised these guys are insane like that. Turns out there was another turtle in another bathroom on the other side of school, both massive. Anyways, they get them out of there and life goes on. Didn't hear much about it, after which I was disappointed about. Being such a small school, we all knew exactly who did it. Come graduation, it just so happens the guy who did it was right next to me after we got our diplomas. Sitting there looking over at mine, I look over and the turtle guy's diploma is, well, it wasn't a diploma. It was a picture of a snapping turtle with some turtle pun like, not so snappy, or something along those lines. The VP switched it out on him and made him go in for a meeting right after to get his actual diploma. I'll never forget the look on his face when he opened that up. Pure gold. Story 4. My younger brother was that kid. He'd always been in trouble in school and is infamous for being the only kid to ever receive an F- in the history of the school district. A fact he is still oddly proud of to this day. He was expelled multiple times from separate schools, but the incident that stands out most is when he was expelled from high school. He was actually trying to be better behaved by the time he got to high school, since we were finally attending the same school for once and he didn't want any blowback on me for his own shenanigans. The problem was his reputation preceded him, and a lot of the teachers and other students would try to pick fights or otherwise catch him out on things, resulting in my brother almost constantly being in detention or suspended over petty stuff. One student in particular seemed obsessed with it and tried to pick fights with my brother multiple times. Near the end of the 3rd quarter of my brother's freshman year, the other kid spread it around school that he was going to fight my brother right after the last class got out. As a result, a large crowd of kids gathered and pushed my brother into the middle of the quad. He tried to get away multiple times, but the crowd kept dragging him back in. The other kid showed up, and just as he was about to start the fight, he noticed his shoe was untied and leaned down to tie it. My brother, wanting no part of this nonsense, harmed the other kid. The crowd started to turn on my brother, but staff arrived and broke everything up before my brother could get mobbed. My brother was arrested but released without charges due to the circumstances. My brother was expelled the next week, yay for zero tolerance policies, and transferred up to a school in Alaska. A month later, he had to be homeschooled for the rest of his senior year. Story 5. Had 2 kids in my grade get expelled. One of them came back after school got out for the day and superglued a good portion of the door locks. They were completely ruined and had to be replaced, thousands of dollars in damage. The second kid was a well-known dealer. The vice principal confiscated his phone and looked through the text messages, seeing messages about deals. The confrontation happened in the gym locker room, and it just so happened to be right next to my locker. This kid put on a persona of a tough guy, but this vice principal was making him look like a little baby, telling him that he's going to be expelled and that he's going to call the cops on him. So this kid is just bawling and then goes nose to nose with the vice principal. The vice principal puts a hand on his chest and pushes him back a little bit, and the kid swings on the vice principal. Vice principal manages to duck and tackle the kid. Funny thing is that I got the entire thing on video and I showed 2 friends of mine the video. Within 2 hours, word had spread that I got it on video, and the head principal pulled me out of class and forced me to delete it in front of him. Looking back on it, the vice principal was way out of line. He didn't have the right to look for those messages at that point in time. This was in 2007. I think laws have since changed. And he was just humiliating this kid in front of everybody. But the kid did not come back to school and the vice principal did not get in trouble. Another thing I forgot about this kid named Chris in middle school. He would bring drinks to school in a water bottle and take swigs of it periodically, and he tried to smoke pencil shavings one time. He got caught with the drink when a teacher smelled it on his breath and consequently expelled him. I'm willing to bet that the kid is either behind bars or 6 feet under. He was a really messed up dude. Alright, so his principal basically forced you to destroy evidence in a case where the school could very obviously anticipate litigation. Man, I wish that kid had sued or had some kind of cloud backup or something, right? Story 6. She was schizophrenic, at least that's what I think. I'm not her doctor. She used to see John Lennon, and for a long time people would just go with it because she'd always liked older music. Her taste was quite eclectic. People assumed it was just a kooky teen affectation. But things started to go from normal to quirky to unsettling over the course of a year when we were around 14 years old. In the drama, she wouldn't let anybody sit in the empty seat beside her because John is sitting there. One lunchtime, she threw somebody because they told her to snap out of it, and nobody thought the John Lennon thing was cute. One time, the class were walking to the locker room from the running track, and she just turned around and started screaming at me and my friend for being so difficult. We weren't even doing or saying anything. We weren't even really walking together, just near each other. And one evening, I got a call at home. She didn't really call me, but we were on okay terms at school. She tells me how horrible it is that they're throwing her out of school 2 days before her birthday. It was nowhere near her birthday, but she didn't come back to school. Actually, she did come back once for an athletics meet. She competed in the 100 meters. She carried on running at the finish line, did 2 laps of the 400-meter track, and then just ran away. Never saw her again. My mom found her on Facebook. Apparently, she's super into church now and seems a lot more content. Story 7. I figure this will be buried, but whatever. Here goes. I actually got that guy expelled and myself into trouble at the same time. This all happened my junior year of high school. Dude was a freshman. So dude lived down the street and caught the bus after me. So I got on the bus that morning and I'm sitting there. Up comes his stop and he takes a seat in front of me. Almost immediately, he turns around, drops a weapon in my lap with easily the most messed up smile I've ever seen on somebody, and says to me, "I've got some business to take care of today." After my initial reaction, I immediately pulled the mag and cleared the chamber. I grew up around weapons and shoved it back into his hands. He kept begging and pleading with me to give his ammo back. He'd harm my dog, yada, yada, yada. Now we pull up to school, I hop off the bus and still have his mag and walk straight to the SRO, hand him this magazine. With this dude still in pursuit of me, I say something like, "Dude right there has a weapon," and what he said to me earlier, and just kept walking into the school. Not even 20 minutes later, I got called out of the homeroom and taken by a cop. I'm handcuffed and taken to the police station where they keep trying to question me, and being a 15-year-old kid, I didn't say anything other than, "Where's my dad?" over and over. So long story short, the dude was sent to some juvenile mental place. He's in prison now for carjacking, last I heard. I was expelled and my parents had to petition the school board to get me unexpelled. I figured I saved somebody's life that day or got what ended up being a 2-week vacation for it. So all's well that ends well, I guess. Story 8. At my high school, it was identical twin brothers that got expelled. Earlier in the year, they somehow managed to steal the janitor's master key, make a copy, and put it back before the janitor noticed. About a month before graduation, on the night before senior prank day, they broke into the school. They went into the classrooms of all the teachers they hated, there were a lot of them, opened all the windows, and spilled bird seed all over the rooms. As a bonus, they also released a greased-up baby pig in the school. When the school opened, the teachers and administrators were greeted with hundreds of pigeons flying around and a baby pig running around the hallways. I used to get to school just as it opened, so I got to witness some of the carnage. It was hilarious watching the fat dean of students trying to catch a pig as pigeons were making a mess all over the place. The twins were expelled that day and had to repeat their senior year at another school. I'm not sure how they were caught, but I heard that they were both called into the office and searched. One of them had the master key in their pocket, and before this incident, they were both model citizens. They were honor students, did a lot of charity, volunteered at all the school events, and were never in trouble. I wonder what they're up to now. Story 9. Copy-pasted from the "Have you ever seen someone snap" thread. Kid called Jack has started a lot of things. Combination of rich parents and no discipline meant he basically felt teachers were scum that just had to be put up with until he turned 16 and could legally leave school. We also have a German teacher and a guidance counselor, Mrs. M, who is this really nice lady and always has a way to calm a situation down. So one afternoon during sports, everyone is told to sit down on the ground, middle of cricket and volleyball, huge pitch, one end had a strip so there were 2 games ongoing, points abandoned. Apparently Jack was in some meeting with Mrs. M and just walked out. So Jack storms down the pitch, Mrs. M following, telling him to stop and come back, no dice. He goes to the volleyball nets and throws one of the poles down. Only one guy was in the direct line of fire, but he had the sense to move when he saw Jack approaching. Runs a lap around the pitch, screaming obscenities at her, then tries to wrestle the biggest guy in our year for his cricket bat. Has to get dragged off by a combination of Mrs. M and 3 of the cricket team. Story 10. It was me. I had skipped a bunch and been a schmuck. I had a girlfriend, who's now my wife. I'd not been at school for a few days, and when I came back, a buddy of mine told me about some guy who had been talking about said girlfriend. The buddy said this guy was saying some pretty vulgar things and what he was going to do to her. I told my buddy I would face him with no true intention of actually fighting anyone. Later that day, this gigantic meathead walks up to me in the PE locker room and says, "I heard you were gonna face me." I noped out of there. I didn't see Meathead again until our lunch break. He was sitting at a table with some buddies and he was showing off some brass knuckles. I was scared at this point. I managed to avoid him the rest of the day, but the rumors started to get around school, and by the time I got on the bus to go home, everyone was talking about how I was going to pass away the next day. I had skipped regularly and it crossed my mind, but I decided to face my fears and go the next day. At no point did I consider bringing a weapon or doing something cheap. My first class was with my GF. We walked together from the bus, and when we got to the door of the classroom, Meathead was waiting. He told me that I better not go in there, walk into the classroom, but I did, and I walked to my seat. The class was about to start. He walks into the room and in front of everybody said, "You're gone when this class is over." My adrenaline was flowing pretty hard, and it was all kind of surreal. Right after he said that, I retaliated and shoved him away while saying, "Enough!" And that was followed by a vicious haymaker thrown by Meathead. I always picture my face in slow motion as liquids flew out of my mouth. Surprisingly, it was not a knockout blow. He was still trying to throw some, but just kind of flailing. I'm pretty sure when I landed on him, it partially knocked the wind out of him. The next part is why I was expelled. I don't know why I didn't just harm him until they pulled me off of him, but I did the weirdest thing. At this point, I had 2 grown adult male teachers pulling me off the Meathead and my GF begging me to stop. No charges were pressed and the cops were not called. I still don't know why, because if someone did that to one of my sons, I would be going after them. The last I saw, the guy was in the principal's office and he was complaining that he couldn't see. I should have gone to the faculty and told someone my plight before any of that ever happened. I missed the entire rest of freshman year. I actually had to do 2 extra years in high school to graduate. I stayed with the same girl and we have been married for 12 years and have 4 kids. I turned out okay, but if I could go back, I would be a wuss and tell on him. Or maybe not. Wink, wink. Story 11. Finally, something I can comment on. So, I had a couple kids expelled from my class while in high school. The first didn't like that he kept failing tests, so his solution was to sneak in and change his grades on the teacher's computer. If I remember correctly, he was expelled 3 hours later. Another guy likes to brag about how he could get any girl he wanted and decided to have intimacy with a freshman in the school bathroom so he could prove it to everyone. Her parents filed charges, but I stopped caring about what happened to that kid long before that incident, so I'm not sure what actually happened after that. Now, the funniest one at the time came from the most unexpected guy. He was always this really quiet, polite kid who I'd known since kindergarten. Well, his parents found out they were going to be transferred for work around the start of the new year, and I guess that triggered this guy because he completely changed. It started with him sneaking around and messing with all the murals around the school, drawing mustaches on people, drawing stuff, etc. Then he would strike matches in the study hall because the sound of it and the odor would drive our 60-something teacher crazy. He would do this throughout the hour every day. He also did a bunch of other small stuff like this, but it all culminated with him messing with the tail of one of the fetal pigs we were dissecting in biology and putting it into the teacher's coffee mug. They had a known dislike of each other long before all this started. At some point, I guess the faculty got tired of his antics and called him and his parents in, and they, quote-unquote, recommended they focus on looking for an appropriate school in the district they'd be moving to. Story 12. He put a pretty real-looking toy weapon in his waistband and walked around lifting his shirt saying, "I'ma go all Columbine up in this place," and stuff like that. So I'm sitting in driver's ed class unaware of this happening, and all of a sudden over the intercom the principal says, "Everyone evacuate the school immediately." We get outside and 5 Regina police cars come flying in, followed by an armored truck. Out comes police dressed like they are on a foot patrol in Afghanistan holding weapons with red dots. They surround the school and wait. I leave because I was getting bored. Eventually they go in. Turns out the kid left. They later arrest him and expelled him. He then becomes the talk of the school a year later after he sprayed 2 people in the face. Then a year later from that, this year actually, he becomes the talk of the country. He made Canadian national news about a month ago because he was walking home in north central Regina at 4 a.m. Why in the world you would dare to do that, I don't know. And somebody pulled up in a car, got out, and harmed him. The kid almost passed away but pulled through. I doubt his face, though, will ever look normal. They never caught whoever who did it, and the news they were using it as an example of random acts in Regina. But a big part of me feels whoever harmed him was in some way connected to what he did. Story 13. Caused an incident in my town for dressing up in black cameo and having pink super soakers. I wrote this story about a month ago in another thread. So, in Connecticut, there's a common senior game called either Seeker or Water Wars. It's pretty simple. You and a friend are a team, and you're assigned to seek another team while another team is assigned to seek you. All secrets, of course. Each team pays $10 to play. Winner gets the pot, usually around $500 or more. You seek other players by using water toys, water balloons, basically anything you can use to wet another person. You can play anywhere that's not school grounds, not the target place of work, and you can't enter their home without permission. And that's it. Everywhere else is fair game. There's only one road that you can enter and exit the school from, which is also a main road for people to travel to work to in the morning. So it's generally a traffic show every day. One team decided they would get their target on her way to school. So they got up at 5 a.m., put on black camouflage clothes, put on black war paint on their faces, and hid behind some bushes of a house's front yard with pink super soakers. While waiting, the owner of the house saw them through her window and thought they were criminals. Fast forward to 9 a.m., I come into school late because I have senior privilege and the schools are on lockdown. I'm greeted at the door by a cop with a hand on his weapon who looks over my backpack and sends me directly to the auditorium. I'm totally confused for an hour until finally the entire senior class is sent to the auditorium for an emergency assembly. The school principal and the chief of police are there and they're mad. They're yelling at us that this game has scared the town and that we all should be ashamed and blah 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 blah. They threaten that anyone caught playing with any form of water toys in town would immediately be arrested. Lol, what? And then demand that the senior class give the jackpot money to the principal immediately. The class erupted into a massive get stuffed mentality and immediately began calling out the police and the principal on their decision. Students gave no care and walked up to the front of the assembly to start insulting the cops, the principal, and explaining how they had no actual legal stance to threaten anything they were trying to enforce, and that parents and their lawyers will get involved if they push it. They pushed it so the entire class again told them to stuff themselves, and our second senior ditch happened. The team that caused all the mess, which honestly is stupid who ruined it for everyone else, got expelled for a couple of days until their parents' lawyers reminded the school that since this was a non-school related incident, they couldn't legally do that. They were allowed back but had a very uncomfortable end to their senior year. The faculty hated our class. They didn't want to come to graduation but were obligated to due to their employment. The principal didn't last long after our class graduated, and the class after us didn't get to play as far as we heard. As for the money, the remaining kids in the game went to the local park for a water fight and gave the money to the winners there. It was the biggest get stuff to the school system and police department my town had ever seen from students. And if you're enjoying the video and getting entertained by some of these stories, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 14. I've been holding on to a story since 3rd grade. In math, we had a student who had severe anger management issues and possibly some other mental disorder. He didn't focus or do his work and got mad at the teacher when they tried to control him. He also constantly blurted and made fun of the teacher and was very, very energetic, which made him known as the class clown. He was fine with that. He craved attention. On a particularly bad day when he wasn't cooperating and started yelling at the teacher, she threatened that she would have to call the principal down to the classroom to take care of him. When he still wouldn't cooperate, she went through with it. The kid actually got up to run when the principal came in. He mentioned running off when yelling at the teacher. My teacher made the bright decision to take the rest of the class out of the room because that kid was not leaving by choice. She basically had us walk around the school and admire other students' art that was hung on the wall for a few minutes. Then we went back. However, the principal and the kid were still in there. You could hear the yelling at the child. So she gave us more time to look at art. The second time we came back, they had left and the room was a mess. Several desks were flipped over and cubbies were open with people's personal belongings strewn across the floor. Not sure what happened to that kid, but he never came back to class after that. I assume he was suspended or possibly expelled. Story 15. The boy who sat next to me in 5th grade, let's just call him RR, was seriously ADHD, but at the time they just treated him like a troublemaker. He could not sit still and was constantly in trouble for shouting inappropriate things in the middle of class. He was the only student I can remember being harmed by the principal, which happened about once a month. I remember he used to love it when the other kids got in trouble. The last time I saw him, someone else had been caught cheating on a test. RR stood on his chair, pointed at the offender, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Noted," which was kid slang for busted. He might have made that word up, come to think of it, but we all said it. I wonder now if the parent of the girl who burst into tears of humiliation when the entire class burst into laughter at her expense had her parents come to the principal and demand that he be removed from her class. After about a week, he was gone. I always wonder what happened to that kid. He was much too cool to associate with my dweebish self during recess, but he was nice to me when we were at our desks. I didn't have many friends in elementary school, so that mattered to me. I hope he grew up to have a nice life. Story 16. There was this kid, Blake, who I think may have been a complete sociopath, just kind of did whatever he felt like to other people and didn't seem to care about the consequences. Seemed to also have ADHD or something. If you looked into his eyes, you only saw mania. One time, this other kid, Nick, who was one of those small, quiet types who were magnets for pestering, decided he'd had enough of being viewed as a victim and picked a fight with Blake. Not his wisest choice. We hear some commotion in the hall and turn to see that Nick has just thrown a sucker punch at the back of Blake's head. With a look on his face of pure enraged confusion, Blake grabs Nick and pushes him against the lockers. And it's not like Blake was a huge guy, pretty typical husky 14-year-old body, but he tapped into some scary strength just then. It seemed like he actually had a psychotic episode or something because all of a sudden his face slackened. He dropped Nick and ran away. For his part, Nick simply sat on the ground with his head in his hands until everyone left. Blake was on thinner ice following this incident. About 2 weeks later, some privileged, popular little schmucks realize that Blake is very persuasive. They decide he's so crazy that anything he does will be blamed on his craziness and not anyone else. So they rev him up pretending to be his friends and convince him to take a Kleenex and then wipe it into this random girl, and he does it. Blake was expelled and the schmucks who orchestrated it received suspensions. This never sat well with me. Like, if you hang a steak in front of a tiger and then let it out of its cage, you should be held accountable for the lives it then takes. The tiger is just being a tiger. Anyway, in a rare expression of karmic justice, it never seemed to sit well with anyone else in the school either. Those guys' popularity very quickly waned as even 14-year-old junior high kids realized what schmucks they were. Story 17. In 7th grade, we got a new student in the middle of the year. Looking back, I'm almost certain she had ADHD or something, or some other hyperactivity disorder, because she literally never stopped talking. She would run up to you, get inches from your face, and just start talking to you like you were best friends. Usually about LMFAO stuff and bullet for my Valentine and what parties she went to. Once she saw me walking home and followed me the entire way just talking about exactly that. Literally nobody liked her outside of the kids with her same personality. Even teachers were visibly annoyed by her. She got in trouble constantly for coming to school with markers all over her. Literally, her arms and legs would be entirely covered in blue, green, and purple dots like freckles. All I know for sure is that she was expelled for bringing substances to school. I'm guessing teachers suspected something and questioned her. I heard she was brought to the administrative office and told them with little coercion, "I've just got some X on me." Then once she knew she was in trouble, she promptly started crying, saying it was for a friend and to please not call the cops. Also that same year, another girl was expelled for harming the world studies teacher in the middle of class. I knew her and she seemed totally normal. I guess she just snapped one day while the teacher was talking to her. Story 18. This one happened right in front of me. So there was a path that led from one of the outer buildings into the main school building, and it passed by a room with a big glass bay window, which was the headmaster's office. I was walking towards the main building with a couple of my friends, and the kid in question was a few steps ahead of us. The kid and we all thought the headmaster wasn't in his office for whatever reason. I think there must have been too much reflection on the glass to see properly. So the kid, who was a couple of years younger than me, decided to wave 2 middle fingers at the window, presumably because he wanted to impress everyone with how cool he was. Then we saw movement inside the office. It turned out the headmaster was in there and saw everything. The kid looked like he had just whizzed himself and dashed off along the path and through the door into the main building. Hot on his heels came the headmaster, who must have been about 60 years old, bellowing, "Come back here, boy." The last I saw, the headmaster was chasing him down the corridor in the main building, but I never saw the kid again after that. Story 19. Well, that kid was my brother, and he once harmed a kid into a 2-day coma. They kind of started fighting in a class they had together. The teacher was able to stop it before it got out of hand and went about with the class. After class, my brother decides it's not over and cold knocks him out. Now, I think calling it a coma might be a bit exaggerated, but that is what the doctors called it at the time. So his expulsion was for 45 days, so the last quarter of the year. Some new young guy on the school board wanted my brother to go to jail, but the kid didn't press charges, and the police called it a fight among kids, so no criminal charges happened. But that school board member pushed for a permanent expulsion. Luckily, another member of the board was the mother of my brother's best friend, so she stood up for him to ensure he didn't get permanently expelled. That was always a fun story to come up with once people realized who my big brother was as I came through school a few years later. Though people did think he was cool, being a teenager and harming a guy into a coma kinda gives you a reputation at that time in our lives. Story 20. It was my first boyfriend. He had a list. To be honest, I didn't know he had a list. I knew he was an angsty poet who had a red notebook. He didn't like me to read, but I figured it was just because he was self-conscious about his bad goth kid poetry. I understood because, well, I too wrote bad goth kid poetry. Then one day I got called to the office. Guidance counselor was there and everything. I thought I was in trouble for my jewelry again, but no. They wanted me to sit down and ask me a bunch of questions about him because they found an item of quote-unquote concern. I don't know how they found it, but there it was, little red notebook. I told them he was a writer and I always thought it was just something he was working on. They flat out told me what it was and that me and my best friend were the first 2 names. I guess because I broke up with him and said friend made him stop following me. I mean, I don't know if he'd actually do anything, but I didn't see him at school again after that. It was a small town, so I saw him in general. He apparently thought I turned him in and still does, but he wasn't welcome back on campus. Story 21. So not just one kid, about 5 to 8. In my school, every year, the seniors are given the principal's key to the school so they can do the senior prank without having to break into the school. The only catch is that the class president hangs on to the key and returns it to the principal when they are finished. This year, there ends up being 2 rounds of pranks, one by the preppy good kids, generally flipping tables, filling the main hallway with cups of water, putting a banner with class of 20XX over the doorways, and another after they had left by the not-so-good kids. They covered every door handle and handrail in the school with Vaseline, sprayed shaving cream all over the commons, the large open room auditorium, then jumped the fence to the pool and it for a while. Needless to say, many were expelled within days of graduating. All of the ones who were involved were arrested, and anyone who tried to help them were told not to come to graduation and had their diplomas mailed to them. After that year, anytime there was a senior prank, there had to be at least 2 teachers to chaperone, and the prank had to be pre-approved by administration. Story 22. I'm so happy this post came up. This kid got expelled for his incredible display of combat skills. So let me set the scene. A British dark winter day on the 3rd floor of the building. There was this one huge window where you can practically see the entire village the school was situated in. In this class, we were being taught French, but one of my peers starts to panic because she's just clocked a bee flying around the room. I was more busy wondering what it was doing in the room in January than panicking at the time, but said bee landed itself vertically on this massive window pane. Then, standing up is the year group's try hard. He was quite an egotistical boy who always believed his random acts made the girls love him. In reality, he had really bad ADHD. So this kid judo kicked the bee on the window pane and the entire glass wall broke. Thank the baby Jesus nobody was on the walkway below because I genuinely think somebody would have been harmed. I gotta hand it to him though, I was scared myself. Story 23. Let's see, where to start. One boy wasn't expelled, most likely moved to a mental health unit after he carved I love you girlfriend's name in school. The GF was expectedly freaked out by this and told teachers. This was year 8, plus there have been a few red flags such as he was a little obsessed and claiming he'd already tried it. One girl was moving to another school, had a history of being a witch, and got expelled on her final day because she thought she could get away with being even more of a witch, while her head teacher wasn't having any of that crap and had someone show her the door. Those were when I was in school. Thankfully, I still get fun stories via my dad, who is a governor there, and one of his duties being to go to meetings and explain to the parents why their precious baby is getting expelled. One boy got expelled for something out of school. Unusual, yes, but considering he threw a brick wall through the windshield of a teacher's car, as said teacher was driving past a bus stop on a busy road, acceptable. Then there was the hilarious case where a student got caught under the substances. Due to amount of students caught with substances, the head brought in a zero-tolerance policy, which means instant expulsion. His father insisted the school was lying and he'd gotten a test kit which had come up negative and the teacher was 20-plus years experienced, didn't know what that was. Guess who the appeal tribunal sided with? Story 24. I don't actually know what got him expelled, but we had this kid come in middle of high school and he was just kind of odd from the beginning. The usual stuff was obviously just disrupting classes and talking bad to the teachers, but honestly, in our school, that was just par for the course. My worst encounters with him were in woodwork class. The teacher insisted we always kept the same benches, and he was put directly in front of me. The teacher would usually show up, give us some instructions, then take off. The guy would just go around destroying stuff, but he'd pick up anything and try to slam them on my hands. He did it a few times. He wasn't even playing. If I hadn't moved my hand quick enough, I'd be down a few fingers or my hand today. Then I had to make sure I never actually just rested my hands on the bench ever, but that wouldn't stop him throwing things at you anyway. He once scaled a tall wall in the school using the heating pipes to climb it. He came in the next day with his hands wrapped up. Obviously, he burned them, but sat there the entire previous day saying nothing and, let go if they're hot, duh. He covered a teacher's chair and belongings in fluids once, and she ran crying from the room. Story 25. He fired his friend with an Airsoft at a school bus stop. Let's call him Tubbs and his friend Beanpole. The stop was right in front of Tubbs' house, so he sat on his porch and fired Beanpole after he walked up and turned to face the street. The bus hadn't arrived and Tubbs walked up laughing. Beanpole got really mad and said he was going to get Tubbs in trouble, so as soon as the bus driver pulled up, Beanpole told the bus driver what happened. The bus driver reported it up the chain of command, and somewhere along the line things got misconstrued. Tubbs was expelled for possessing and firing a student with a BB on school property. Beanpole had to get called into the office to explain what happened, and Beanpole was not the brightest kid. Combined with social anxiety and maybe a touch of Asperger's, Beanpole didn't explain that he was only fired with an Airsoft, that it happened well before the bus arrived, and that he only wanted to get his friend a slap on the wrist. They took his testimony and expelled Tubbs the next day. Due to some fun legislation, Tubbs was also not allowed to enroll in any of the other public schools in the state for 2 years, I believe. So Tubbs went to Christian private school for 2 years and then joined back with his public school friends in 10th grade. Middle school was weird, but it had its moments. I only know this secondhand because I got on the bus at the stop before Tubbs and Beanpole, so even I don't know the entire truth of things. I never talk with them much. Story 26. In school, we had a set of fire doors in a corridor known only as, quote, the swinging doors of doom. These doors were 2-inch thick, solid oak doors with 1-inch thick safety glass with Meyer Wesch inside, windows that were around 20 feet high and swung back and forth at a higher speed than anyone could walk through them. One day, the kid, we will call him Space Marine because that was his IT password that everyone in the school knew, was bugging me by repeatedly kicking me in the back of the leg, so I pretended to chase him off. Why this worked, I'll never know because I was a tiny, thin kid who got an exemption from playing rugby because I was too weak. And Space Marine was basically twice as big as me, but he went sprinting at top speed into the corridor, head down in front of him. He got to the end of the corridor, turned the corner, and then all I heard was a massive sound. Thinking that Space Marine may have actually been hurt, I ran to the end of the corridor to help him, and all that there was the doors swinging at full speed and the glass in both doors was shattered and Space Marine was nowhere to be seen. He was rumored to still be in the school for a month after that, but no one ever saw him and then he was finally expelled. The doors were also fixed so they didn't swing so fast and they were then known as the closing doors of mild discomfort. All it took was a rampaging lunatic nearly ending himself to get the school to do some door repair. Story 27. Well, he wasn't really that kid in the first place. Accidents happen, especially when dumb kids are involved, and we were the rowdiest class. He happened to be a part of 3 unfortunate encounters with different actors within the span of about 2 weeks, with the last one resulting in major injuries that could have been him, but wasn't. Each encounter left a mark on his record, but the major injury was a big problem that had to go away fast, and he was the perfect scapegoat. You see, our school had a playground, and after hours, groups of dumb friends played around, shoved each other, play fought in the sandpit, stuff like that. One of these shoves landed one of us on the blunt edge of a stone pillar. We all went home because of the scare. Next day, parents, teachers, and the principal started their own game of toss the blame around, and because the kid who shoved had prior recent behavior marks, he had to catch it. The school escaped the, quote, improperly secured facilities fine and lawsuit. The principal escaped losing his job, and the parents of the kid got to vent and feel justice. And the kid who had a bad couple of weeks got to go on a separate way with the rep as that kid. Life wasn't any better. They won, and we remained the dumb kids who realized the truth way too late to do anything about it. Not that we could have done anything about it either anyway. Well, if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.